everyone, and welcome to Humans of Campus Housing. My name is Leo, one of the hosts, and I'm super excited to be here as we dive into the world of student housing and higher education. Whether you're a seasoned housing professional or just curious about what goes on behind the scenes in campus life, this podcast is for you. We'll be talking about everything from moving day chaos to building communities that make students feel right at home. And trust me, my co hosts have some amazing stories and insights to share. I'm here to guide the conversation and maybe learn a thing or two along the way. So let's get right into it. Let's meet my co hosts, who are the real experts here. Why don't you introduce yourselves and give our listeners a little taste of what they can expect from humans of campus housing? Let's start with Elizabeth.
Hi, everyone. Welcome as we journey into this Humans of Campus Housing podcast. My name is Elizabeth Cox. I have been working in student housing for almost 20 years. I counted how many move-ins. That seems to be a popular thing right now. I think this was my 18th move-in. Um, I currently serve as the Senior Director for Housing Facilities at Georgia Tech in Atlanta, Georgia, but I've had the privilege to work both here in the U.S. and in Europe in student housing, and can't wait to talk about all the things we want to talk about in this podcast, and looking forward to chatting with both Leo and our next co-host, Ben.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Elizabeth.
Elizabeth. Yep. Thanks, Elizabeth. Thanks, Leo. Hi, everybody. My name is Ben Wicker. I have been working in university housing um, for, since my junior year of undergraduate, my undergraduate experience. And so I think when I did my count earlier this fall, when we were getting ready for training, I was on consecutive move-in, either number 24 or 25. So
Wow.
It's been a minute. Yeah. And I'll have been working full time for 20 years come this spring. That's when I finished my master's degree. And so I'm currently serving as the director of the residential student experience at Florida State University in Tallahassee. And I've been or in this position now for about a year and a half. Like I said, I've been working housing for a while. I've also had stops all over the Southeast, in Georgia, in Tennessee, and previously in Florida as well, where I did my master's degree at the University of South Florida in Tampa. So I really love this idea and being able to talk with Leo and Elizabeth about this, and just love being able to connect and commiserate and tell stories and really try to build on the awesome community that I've come to love and really appreciate during my time as a housing pro.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ben. I did want to ask each of you, why did you each choose to work in student housing? Let's start with Elizabeth.
Well, I just kind of fell into it. I think, I'm always impressed with the consecutive years of move-ins, because I've had a bit of a zigzag career. So I was not involved in housing or residence life when I was a student. And then I graduated and didn't have a job after I graduated. And so my parents were looking at me like, what are you doing? And got a job in summer conferences. And so did my first summer actually doing facilities work, ironically enough, with building turns and linen shifts and fun conference parties, I'll tell you that, as a student. And so, and then went to go work at a law firm for a year and hated it. Absolutely hated it. So went back to graduate school, went to theology school, actually, and then needed a job. So then I found a hall director job my second year of graduate school. And then someone said to me, hey, did you know that you can do this for a living? And I was like, what? And I guess the rest is history. So that's kind of how I fell into it. And then kind of took some forays into the private world, took some forays into other parts of student affairs and student life, but it always kind of ended back in housing. So yeah.
What a huge, hard turn from law to what you're doing now. That must have been a huge awakening for you right there.
Well, I think it brings it. To be honest with you, it kind of brings it all together in a way that I never imagined. I mean, theology was really about kind of solving problems that about problems and thinking about things that kind of make the world tick and kind of that people give people purpose. And I was also an athlete in college. So I just think about how all these things, thinking that I wanted to be a lawyer because that's what I thought people were supposed to do, probably spend more time now talking about risk and legal things and HR things than I really wanted to do, which is probably why, I ended up getting a doctorate in learning leadership and organizational development, because that's a lot of what we do in student housing. It brings we're just one big comprehensive business that happens to be really fun and really cool and really interesting, but also really stressful and can be really hard as well. So, yeah.
Really hard, but really gratifying, I'm sure.
True.
Yep.
True. We work with some cool people, including students, sometimes parents,
Right.
maybe,
It wasn't
depending on your
gratifying.
emails in the morning.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I don't
All
think
right.
if it was gratifying, either one of us would be here.
Very much
It's
so.
true.
Ben, same question.
Well, I was a first generation college student. I went to a small private liberal arts school in Tennessee. And going into it, had no idea what to expect. Now, that school had a 4-year residency requirement, so I knew I was going to be living on for 4 years, even though I was only like 20 minutes from home. And I made the decision at that point to get involved on campus. I'm going to get the most out of this, not from a transactional standpoint, but just I haven't had this opportunity before. And so immediately stepping onto campus, and it wasn't hard on a small campus. I got involved in SGA. I got involved in orientation. I was in the community band. My resume from my time at my undergrad is pretty impressive in terms of activities. I knew that being an RA was something I wanted to do. I didn't feel like I had a particularly great RA my freshman year. And I applied for that going into my sophomore year. I actually was not hired. And people who've been around me for a while know that I still tease the person who did not hire me, because they are still in housing and higher education, and someone with whom I'm still very close. But I did make a promise that I was no longer going to do that in large public settings. And so anyways, I started as an RA my sophomore year, or my junior year, and was placed in the building that I wanted to be in the least. It was my second year being in this building with no air conditioning in East Tennessee, bad plumbing, bad electricity. That building is no longer there. But I wanted to be an RA, right? I knew that was just something that I wanted to do. And then going into my senior year, again, in a building I really didn't want to be in, mostly first year students as a senior. But that was okay. I wanted the position more than I wanted to live in a specific place. I too had I had worked several different positions, but in my junior year, I was working for the federal government, working for Social Security. It was making pretty good money for an undergraduate student at the time. And they wanted me to come work full time. And I looked around, and I was like, oh, you people are fine, but I don't want to be any of you all. And it wasn't anything against any of them personally. I was just, the job was just, it just wasn't for me. I won't go into the details, but, and so I had some really good mentors, including the person who did eventually hire me to be an RA, a couple of high-level student affairs folks at the institution. And, I just, they said, hey, you can do this work, you should apply to some graduate schools. And at the time that meant creating copies of my resume, putting them in envelopes, mailing them places, making phone calls. There wasn't emails, there weren't databases, there wasn't any of this stuff, right? And so fortunately I was accepted to a couple of graduate programs, and really wanted to go into student affairs. And so I chose the program at the University of South Florida. Went there for a couple of years, got married while I was there, and finished my master's degree, got experiences in a couple of different areas, was taught by some really amazing people in that program, folks who are theorists and leaders in this field. And was surrounded by a wonderful cohort of people, many of whom I'm still very close to. And I've just been working in housing ever since, just kind of making my way up through, made lateral moves, but also made some vertical moves up the ladder. Gotten involved professionally in some professional organizations at a high level, and have really just found the work, to be fulfilling. And don't really have any plans right now to move out of that. I'm still looking for ways to be engaged, and I'm about to re-enroll or enroll in a doctorate program, I hope. That's probably a conversation for another time, definitely. But it's it's something I really enjoy doing, and I have no regrets. And even though I've been doing this consecutively, there are still times where I have to explain to my parents, no, I can't come to that thing in August, or no, I can't come to that thing in July, despite the fact that I've been doing this for quite a while. So yeah.
It seems like there's a lot of things that you're like, topic for another time. I think there's going to be a lot of episodes where we're going to hear a lot of stories from Ben. So I'm really excited to hear how some of these stories are going to come about. But before we go into some of the major themes in campus housing that we're going to cover in this podcast, I did want to ask, why do you think campus housing is such a critical part of the student experience? Let's start with Elizabeth.
Sure. I think that, being able to have a student-centered residential experience when you enter into, undergraduate or kind of that post-high school education is super important, because this is the proving ground for independent living. And to be able to have that with other people who are in the same part of life as you, and in a residential environment that is meant to both give you independence, both responsibility and community, right? So that you can have people who are around you, who you can talk to, you can learn from, have fun from, but also that you can have that peer mentorship, right? That kind of structured social life, that life, learning how to do the little life things of doing your own laundry and kind of, maybe making your bed or picking up after yourself or cleaning a toilet, maybe things that you've never had to do before. And this, that type of environment, you don't, when you kind of move through your adult life and you move into your family life or to your career, you don't really have that opportunity anymore. And so I think that's really the crux of it. And actually, I think why the US is such a powerful place, because we have really emphasized this idea of kind of intentional student housing and living in the university campus housing as a part of the educational experience. And so that's why you see kind of, purpose-built student accommodation, right? Which is really, residence halls built for students popping up around the world, because it's not just an American thing, it's a human thing in the development of both young adults into their adulthood, into their next phase of life. And it's really fun. I mean, you get to live next to your friends. I mean, now you have to either, how often as an adult do you get to like walk down the hallway to have a party with your friends, right? I think that's an amazing idea. And so it's certainly something that we should continue to advocate for. And that doesn't even count all the policy or the educational outcomes or the financial outcomes around that. We're just talking about the kind of core human pieces of it. So I think that's a really, so it matters, right? And it's potential, it's careers. I mean, we're one of the biggest employing departments, particularly in student affairs. We're definitely the biggest employer. And that's a career, and it's not just a career for master's level theorists of student development. It's a career for electricians. It's a career for custodians. It's a career for HVAC guys. Like, this is a place where kind of it's a little microcosm of the city, and which is pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, those are all, and I agree with everything that you said. I think, one of the things, a couple other points that I would add is that, we oftentimes look at how we structure the residence hall environments, and it has shifted, right? You go into the history of higher education, and Back post World War II, it was dorms, right? It was a place to lay your head. It was beds and heads, and that was really it. But then there was a shift, right? There was a shift in really trying to make that an intentional place to live. And so, we went from this idea of having, a safe place to meet those kind of basic Maslowian needs, to then a higher order of, okay, you are learning those things that Elizabeth was talking about, right? You're learning those skills, you're learning outside of the classroom, and it is kind of one of the great laboratories, whether that's formally acknowledged, in academia sometimes. Again, another point of contention and discussion.
Yes.
But
a great episode, I think.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
We're very intentional with how we do things, and cognizant of the learning that does happen, because you're living around other people. You're forced to, if you have a roommate, you're forced to create this relationship, figure out how to make that work, for 9 or 10 months. And it is fun, right? We do try to, have a lot of engagement and make that, we really create those intentional opportunities for fun, with a little bit of learning tied in sometimes, but and also getting to do some cool things that you're probably not going to get to do in other places, right? And on top of that, it's a safe place. Not only is it a safe place from a security standpoint,
yes,
but it's a safe place to make mistakes. And I tell parents that every year, like, if you're going to make a mistake from the ages like 18 to 21, being on campus and living on campus is one of the best places, because you're going to be held accountable for what you did, but you're not going to necessarily face the same consequences. Now, you go out and you commit a felony, you break the law, things like that. Yes, it's going to happen, but it kind of is a easing process into this structure.
That's
two
right.
other things. Yeah. And two other points I want to make is, one, living on campus almost always puts you closer to the other resources and commodities that are available on campus. So proximity is huge, right? You don't have to drive to campus. You don't have to bike. You can walk most of the time. And so you're really close to what all of campus has to offer. The second thing is that the data show that students who live on campus are generally academically more successful. We just got our data back from our assessment folks today, as shows that our residential population have a GPA of like 3.56, and our out-of-state students are almost at a 3.7, right? And so I'm sure Georgia Tech's a little bit higher because they're Georgia Tech, but
different curriculum.
Right. In comparison to, students who don't live on campus, our students perform at a higher level academically. And so there are those incentives, right? There's a whole laundry list, and we'll talk to you all day and convince you that, it is the better option. But at the same time, it isn't for everybody, right? There are people who struggle with it for various reasons, and it's not for everybody.
And I think that's a great point, Ben. And I think, while everyone is welcome, there may be students with particular needs, particularly when you go to large flagship institutions like we work at, right? That maybe on-campus housing we just can't fulfill. And that's disappointing, but sometimes it's the reality of things as well. And I also think that, so much of housing today is based on social policy, which is based on politics, which is based on systematic class and race issues. And on-campus housing is a place where it's truly, when you have a lottery system, when you have a first-year building, it doesn't matter where you come from. It doesn't matter if you're on a full scholarship or you're full pay, if you're international, if you're a first-generation student, or you have your name on a building on the campus, right? Everybody gets to live and share that same bathroom. And I think that there are not a lot of places in the world that you really get to have that, where you can make those mistakes and make those friends. And so it really can be a vehicle for kind of what goodness can be in the world, and how we as a human beings can kind of, actually live with each other in a productive and fun community.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
That was my save the world. That was my save the world rant. Campus. So that's going to be the title of this episode. Campus housing saves the world.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love it. There you go. You're making it a lot easier for everyone.
That's right.
Yep. So I guess speaking on that, for listeners who are tuning in for the first time or they're curious about why is this so important, um, I wanted to ask, how do you see this podcast contributing to the larger conversation around student housing? And also, what are some of the major themes or issues in campus housing that we'll be exploring on this podcast? Elizabeth, what are your thoughts on it?
Well, I think it's, I was recently walking to lunch on campus with a colleague, and we ran into another colleague who looked a little stressed out. And she said, "What are you guys up to?" And I said, "Well, we're just processing this call that we just had with HR, if I'm being honest." And she said, "Me too." And so, and we realized that we have all these common issues, but we don't actually ever get to talk about them, and they're not going to be talked about in the official meetings. Right. But there's some things that we just need to kind of work out and build community around and kind of share and learn from each other. And so that's what I hope this podcast is. I hope this podcast feels like running into someone on campus that you haven't seen in a while, or a friend from an old campus that you haven't seen. And you're like, "Oh, are you guys dealing with this? Oh my God, so are we. Let's talk about it." Or, learn from Ben and I's mistakes. Hopefully, we'll have guests to talk about some cool topics and we can learn from them. So really, this is really just kind of that kind of, I want to say kind of offline talk because we're a podcast, but really that time where, we can get together as people, as professionals and say, what's this really all about?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's that relatability, that ability to give a platform to speak on these issues that maybe perhaps a lot of the times they don't have that outlet or
Yeah.
that those resources to be able to do so.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Ben, what do you think?
So I know as we were talking about and kind of, formulating how we were going to approach this, one of the things that I love to be able to do is when I connect, kind of like Elizabeth was saying, either with people on campus or people who do what I do at other places, right? And being able to commiserate and talk about, hey, this is what's going on our campus, and hearing that it's going on other places too, and being able to connect with other people and know that, like, while it's stressful for us on our campus, there are folks with whom, I could connect if I wanted to. And one of the things that I've really tried to make a very cognizant effort of the past few years is staying more connected to my colleagues at other institutions, right? And so when I'm thinking about somebody, picking up my phone, sending a text and saying, "Hey, what's going on?" And that may lead to something, it may, not lead to anything, but just making sure that they remember that I remember them, and that, that I'm thinking about them and whatever they're going through at the time. And I found that then when I do get to connect with those people in person, it's that much more meaningful. Now, I'm an introvert, and so those one-on-one connections are huge for me. It's also, kind of a catharsis for me to be able to connect with my friends and colleagues. But it's one of my other kind of soapbox things and TED Talk moments is like, it's always been a funny kind of phenomenon to me that, like, I've gotten very close with a lot of people with whom I've worked throughout the years, right? And when I see them at conferences, it's always, "Hey, give me a hug around the neck. Let's go have dinner together. Let's go grab a drink together, and spend some quality time and catch up," right? And I love being able to do that. And I knew, that connection was forged a lot of time in the workplace, but in the workplace, it's hard to have that same sort of connection.
Right.
And so I'm like, why, I love, I'll tell my staff, like, if you ever need a hug, as long as you're okay with it, I'm happy to give you a hug, right? I'm a hugger, but it rarely happens at work, right? And so, but as soon as I leave and I see that person at the next conference, you better believe, there's a hug happening. And so I know that those meaningful connections exist. And so if I can find a way, to help bridge that, to make people maybe a little bit more comfortable or a little bit more likely to engage and connect with each other, then I want to be able to do that. The other things that I think that I hope to get out of this is this field is a large but a relatively small field, right? We're usually there's an adage that we're never more than like 1 degree of separation away from somebody else, and I've rarely found that to not be the case within housing. And, we all work under this umbrella of housing, which is kind of governed and supervised by ACU Hawaii, the Association of College and University Housing Officers International. And, they have kind of set forth some imperatives. You're talking about the things that we're concerned about. And for the most part, I feel like some of those imperatives are pretty head on. But to me, a couple of the ones that I think that are going to really be boilerplate issues here is this multi-generational workplace that we're in, and how people enter and exit this field and do this work after or with COVID and during COVID. We really, I think the landscape shifted in terms of what our workplace looks like and our common practices. And then I think the other thing is accessibility and affordability, tied into also the politics of higher education. Elizabeth already hit on some of that, but we are in a time right now. I know we're in an election year, but aside from that, especially with both of us being in the South, Elizabeth being in a purple state, I'm in a blue or in a red state that has blue tendencies sometimes. I'm in a purple state too. Let's put it that way. But it's we are ever more having to pay attention to those things that are affecting us from the outside, those external forces that are affecting the way that we do our work and how we approach things, and how that's changed the landscape of how we've done things.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I really hope that we can use this time to have conversations, around, why does campus housing exist? Why are universities in the business of housing, right? Why do we need to, why does affordability and accessibility matter, right? What is the role of what is the role of private companies in the U.S. and across the world? I think what does professionalization mean? So I think that there are all of these conversations that we have at professional levels and at institutional levels, but there's the conversation in the conference room, and then there's the conversation at lunch. And we want to be having the conversations at lunch, I think.
Yep. I don't think I could have said it any better. And also, Ben, I'm expecting a big hug next time I see you in person.
That's right.
I get great hugs. It's my family's decompression. Like when they're like, go hug your dad. So they're not always about that, but they always feel better afterwards. So
I think everybody does. Well, I think with that, one last question for the both of you. What's something you're particularly excited about on this podcast? Elizabeth?
I'm excited for the potential conversations that we're going to have with folks that we don't normally necessarily get to have these conversations with, and kind of the guests that we'll get to bring on to ask things that we would not ask on a conference panel. I think that's for me a big excitement.
For me, it's again, that ability to connect. Doing a podcast like this is kind of a bucket list item for me, and so being able to connect and just share my opinion in a way where I'm not having to fight for air, right? Again, I said that I'm an introvert, and so just having a platform through which I can share my ideas, because the ideas are always there, right? And being able to again connect with other experts, other people who we trust and respect and really look to within housing, and hear some of those informed points of view, and I'm hoping again, the pie in the sky version of me really hopes that people will use this as an opportunity to take their own advice, right? Because we're the worst at that sometimes, right? We're great at supporting people and giving advice and sending folks to places to help them out, but we're really bad sometimes at taking our own advice and finding those ways to take care of ourselves. And so I'm really hoping that that's kind of a byproduct of all this as well. Well, we really appreciate everybody tuning in with us today, and hope that you take something away from this, take it back to your colleagues. And I hope that you will go out there and take care of yourself, take care of your colleagues, take care of those people in your bubble, and take care of your students. And if there's anything that you'd like to hear us talk about, please let us know. Reach out to us either on social media or through the comments, maybe. Be nice. We're here to be nice to each other, of course. But we're looking forward to seeing you all next time. And thanks for tuning in today.